We're really happy to have Adam Flint here to talk to us. Adam is co-founder of the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition and the board vice president of that. He's also an adjunct lecturer on environmental studies program at Binghamton University. He coordinates the Southern Tier Green Jobs, Green New York outreach effort. And right now, he's in the process of gathering petition signatures from Vestal residents for a ban on fracking in the town of Vestal. And so I'm very pleased that Adam can be here to speak today. His topic is called The Way Forward, Passing Municipal Fracking Bans and Building New York's Green Economic Renaissance. So thanks, Adam, for being here.
Thank you, Wes, and thanks. Thank you. Thanks also to Jerry Wiley for organizing this event, and many familiar faces here to many of you for doing the work that you're doing. I actually wanted to begin with a story, which was a story that I've told before, but was inspired by the sermon today, the day before Martin Luther King Day. It was the responsive piece on a network of mutuality. And the call was, we were caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. And the response, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Well, this reminded me of a meeting in Pittsburgh more than a year ago, organized by the Oil and Gas Accountability Project. Brought together people from around the 50 United States and Canada who are profoundly concerned about the impact of this process. One point, a cowboy stood up, about 6'4", with a hat, and he said, I have to say this. We have been getting screwed by this process out where I live in Wyoming for at least 20 years. And nobody really cared until it came east. And while I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, I thank God that you're paying attention. And the implication was clear. We have been burning the gas and the oil that comes from somewhere else, and now they are here. And so I think there's a responsibility there. The other responsibility, which is a little closer to home, pretty much for my entire lifetime, and you can guess how long that is, the rural economy of upstate New York, and in particular the agricultural economy of upstate New York, has not been so good. In fact, it's been really lousy. And as I'll talk about later, I really think that that's really why we're here. Because if we lived in a thriving economy, in an area where people with land were secure in what they're already doing and able to pay their taxes, I don't think we'd be having this conversation, or it would be a different conversation. So normally when you go to a talk about gas, you begin with a litany about how bad it is or how good it is, and then it goes from there. I'm not going to do that today. I have 4 points to make. One is that this is a critical turning point in the history of our region. The choice we make now is probably not going to be revocable, right? This is going to determine what happens for several generations, and those who take actions now to support their benefits, beliefs, and interests will really rule the day. The second point is that, and this is again where you often don't find a lot of attention paid to this, we need to really aggressively articulate and pursue a green economic renaissance in upstate New York, and we need to be a little bit better at knowing what we're talking about when we say that. We need to be able to articulate that, and we need to actually have it happen. And when it is already happening, we need to call attention to it. Thirdly, and this is where we get a little more traditional with these talks, the benefits, these economic benefits of gas production are overstated, short-lived, and unsustainable. So I will do some of that. Then finally, I'll talk about the movement to ban fracking. So first, I think in terms of the choices we make, we can either become the leader in a green economic renaissance, which is growing here and nationwide, although not very well featured in the mainstream media. And it's not fast enough to meet the existential challenges we face, but it's happening. Or we can allow our region to become among the last sacrifice zones to the bankrupt take, make, waste model of society that our civilizations, plural, have pursued for a while now, right? Generations. So what's this green economic renaissance? Well, I imagine that many of you know as much or more about this than I do. As I've said before, this area's economic hardships make it ripe for the gas patch. And we know from the industry itself that those most vulnerable to the blandishments of the riches that come to some from gas are from communities that are predominantly rural, conservative, economically distressed, and fatalistic about anything else ever working there. Well, that's sort of a good description of the northern tier of Pennsylvania and the southern tier of New York. Ever since the IBM ride ended badly, we haven't really had much of a direction here, and it's time we got one. My feeling is that, and it's hardly original with me, that a green economic renaissance is the answer. So often when people talk about this, it's, well, how shall I put it? It's not specific enough in its details and data to convince other than those of us who already are of the faith. And so one of the things that I feel is really important, and I'm not coming here with all of the data, far from it, but I intend to work with others to get it, is to be able to do three things. One is to measure what's out there now and look at other people who've already measured it. How many jobs are currently being created in this state in renewable energy, energy efficiency, in agriculture, from farm to table in agriculture, focusing more and more on local and on organic, on tourism, on recreation that rely heavily on a clean, pristine, and attractive environment, on green transportation initiatives, on land use, and so forth. And then, well, then there's stuff that's happening someplace else, like in New Jersey, for instance. Anybody heard of what the solar jobs law in New Jersey has done for New Jersey? Well, I hadn't either until I went to an energy security conference just about a month ago in Corning. New Jersey, in just a few years, has moved behind California in the number of installations of solar panels. And the very simple thing that was done and is proposed again this year is to simply increase the requirement of the major and other utilities of how much solar power gets to the grid. And I'm forgetting the precise number, but I think the eventual top goal by 2025 is something like 4% of their entire portfolio. And it doesn't start with 4, it starts smaller. What this does is it gears up demand because the utilities need to get that supply to the grid. And so companies like ETM Solar, who we know well here, and many, many others can grow and others can start. Larger operators can invest more in manufacturing, in installation, and then you have the capacity to ramp it up even further. Because we know that at least, very conservatively speaking, 25% of our energy needs in the state can be met by solar. We know Germany, which is a far cloudier place than even this cloudy place, has done better. We can do better. But we need to actually have the capacity to do that. How many jobs is that going to create? Then there's the program that I work with, Green Jobs, Green New York. We know that in just a short 5 years, if we do our jobs right, we can create something on the order of 14,000 direct and indirect jobs across the state. But what I'd like to be able to stand here and tell you is for every area of the green economy, the actual and the promised job and economic benefits, hard numbers, as hard as you can with projections, for that. So that when we have a conversation like the one that took place at Binghamton City Council before they voted for a ban, which was all about the economy. It's really about nothing else. Then we could say to those who are saying, well, my hotel It's got a lot of new people in it that weren't coming before from Pennsylvania. And we say, well, on the one hand, what's going to happen is when this really takes off, if it really takes off, your hotel will be filled with people working for the industry, and it won't be able to accommodate the people who wanted to come for graduation or for their weddings or what have you. You build some more hotels maybe. But sooner or later, the vast majority of those people who came for that boom will go home with the bust. And when that bust comes is anybody's guess, because a lot of credible people from the industry, from the financial sector, from the media have called into very serious question, and from the geology profession, about how much gas is really economically recoverable and the economics of the entire business, which was embarked upon during 2007 and 2008 when gas prices were through the roof. And then the economy crashed. Deborah Rogers was at the same meeting with the cowboy. She's an advisor to the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. She spent most of the first part of her career in high finance. And her basic thesis is that the finance of the industry is a shell game, that they are not going to be able to make their targets, that they are not going to be able to pay their investors, and that they are absolutely desperate to get as much gas out of the ground, as cheaply out of the ground as they can, to try and do that, to try and make some money, and also to try and sell off acreage to Total from France and other companies in order to get some cash. Interestingly enough, France has banned this process, but no problem. Total will still do it here, or it'll still own the acreage here, whoever actually is the drilling service company they choose. So I think we really get a lot of bang for the buck by doing the green economic renaissance. It's good in and of itself, and it makes gas unnecessary. In two senses. It's not the savior of our economic destiny. It's not our savior. And also, we create the energy future that we need to be creating right now. Because, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, the original contention that natural gas is the cleaner burning savior to transition us from our dirty present to our renewable future has been at the very least called seriously into question by a number of climate scientists who have contended that if you look at the life cycle of this process, from the process of getting it out of the ground to getting it into the pipelines to where it is burned, where indeed when you burn it, it's cleaner than oil and coal, but there's so much leakage that occurs that it has a very heavy cost in terms of greenhouse gas. It's just not going to be needed. So another thing I'll mention is that this region historically has not really worked and played well with itself in terms of regional planning, regional economic development, planning of any kind at all. Forget green. Amazingly, a process that was somewhat problematic in a number of respects, launched by our governor, the Regional Economic Development Councils, changed that. Was it done the way I would have liked to do it? No. But it was done, and it forced players to the table from Schuyler County to Shenango County that have not been forced to the table before. And some very interesting things came of it. One of those interesting things was, if you look on the website, the first part of the proposal was about renewable energy, about solar manufacturing. It was about training at the community colleges, which did include welding training, by the way, which of course is necessary for the gas work. But it included promoting energy efficiency. And anyone who knows anything at all about energy, whether you like gas or you don't like gas, is the first job of anybody dealing with our energy problem is efficiency, right? We want to reduce the amount we use to reduce the amount we need. Very simple. And the low-hanging fruit is energy efficiency in another way, economically speaking. Because in order to retrofit hundreds of thousands of homes, small businesses, large businesses, nonprofits, our aging housing stock from Maine throughout New England and mid-Atlantic requires local workers to do millions of hours of work. And it's better paying than a lot of things out there right now. And it's at all levels. You can go in with a GED. If you've got your soft skills in order and you're willing to work hard, you can become an installer. Now, installer is not an easy job. It's probably an easier job than a well worker, which is one of the most dangerous occupations you can find, but it does mean you're crawling around in crawl spaces and attics and basements and all weathers and all temperatures. But so maybe you do that for a few years, and then what? Then you decide, all right, I'm going to get trained and become an analyst. I'm going to learn how to do energy assessments, often known as energy audits. Pays better, conditions are better. You don't have to be quite as physically fit. And if I'm in the contracting business now and I see that there's actually a market for this, I may say, you know what, I'm going to go out and get myself or some of my people certified with the Building Performance Institute so I can qualify for some of this funding. Because there is now funding that allows people to get up to $25,000 worth of work on their homes with no down payments, low interest, and if you sell your home, the debt stays with it. That's one program in one sector of energy efficiency. We'll build out the whole vision, make it happen. That's what the governor ought to be doing. That's what our elected officials ought to be doing. That's what we all ought to be doing. Now, we have, of course, heard other numbers. In terms of the benefits of gas, there was a recent analysis of the job creation in Pennsylvania, new job creation. A number that's been thrown out a lot, 47,000. Over the last 3 years, real number closer to 9. And part of this has to do with the fact that not all of us are very good at employment economics. And part of it is maybe due to the fact that some of us would like to see those numbers be larger than they are. So if I create a job that hires you away from him to work for me because I'm paying you better, I'm paying you better. So that counts, but it's not a new job. But if I, in fact, create a wholly new job that employs somebody else, that's a new job. So 9,000 over 3 years. So does the gas business create jobs and economic development? Oh, yeah, of course it does. The question is, how sustainable is it and at what cost? And the basic thesis here is we can do something else, the green economic renaissance, that creates more jobs at lower costs and is more sustainable. Will it give me as a landowner, if I were one who owned enough, a signing bonus that could make me wealthy at one stroke of the pen? No. That's Vegas. It won't. And the reality is that, as we all know, just like the people who don't like gas, the people who own land and lease land are as diverse as they come. We've got people there who are up against the wall and have been for a long time and are facing ruin. We've got people, on the other hand, who are as rich as Midas already and don't need another dime. We've got people who need the money who are deciding to go against their economic interest and oppose it. We have people who don't need the money who are doing the same thing. So I don't go around bashing landowners, and I sure as hell don't go around bashing farmers, because I feel like we do have the majority of this population that lives in this part of the region, urbanites, suburbanites, we have a responsibility. Because we're the ones with the electoral clout to make agriculture pay again, to make being a dairy farmer not only one of the hardest jobs there is, but one that would allow you to live a decent living, make a decent living, leave that to your kids if they want to farm. So, you know, it's unfortunate. And I feel that if this conversation had started back in 2007 with an actual conversation rather than a land grab, quoting Aubrey McClendon, the CEO of Chesapeake, who saw an opportunity and grabbed it, and in I think, a very dishonest way, then maybe we'd be in a different place right now. But as it is, you know, we're some people on one side, some people on the other side. I really feel like we can come together as a community around real, sustainable, green economic activity. It's going to take more work. It's going to take more time. And not everybody has more time. And a lot of people work a lot harder than I do. So I'm not going to stand here and say it's going to be easy. But I really think, you know, I decided to put down roots here. I have 2 little girls back there. I don't want to live here if this goes forward. I know what it's going to mean. And I think everyone at this point knows what it's going to mean. So I'd really like to see us take that other path. Just a few other specifics. Thank you. I remember at the Binghamton meetings, some people from Williamsport in Pennsylvania spoke. And Williamsport is a place I have never been, so I'm just going to say what I heard at the meeting. But it sounds like a town that in some strange way might not be that different than Binghamton in one respect. Binghamton could have drilling, make no mistake. It is possible, but it's likely if it were, it would be not much. And what mostly would happen is, in fact, that the people who work in the industry would patronize the economy of Binghamton. I think that's true. Happening in Williamsport, right? They were just sort of maintaining for a while, and now they're doing way better than maintaining. Fast forward a little while. Is it hard for us to predict what happens in extractive industries, boom and bust? It's easy as pie. Look all around the United States and around the world at places where the mines, the wells, the whatever have played out. It's not pretty. You're leaving behind the infrastructure that was built up, the extra schools, the extra retail, the extra services that were built up, and who remains of the population to support the taxes in order to pay for that. Not to mention the infrastructure. And you notice I haven't yet mentioned what we mostly mention on this side of the aisle, what's happened to the water, to the environment, to the other living creatures around us, to the air, to the health of our people. It's not pretty. And so I would really hope that we'd choose a different future. It's more likely, as Professor Susan Christofferson and others have said, Christofferson is one of a number that have done somewhat more careful economic analyses, not complete enough yet. But look, where most of the economic development is going to go is where headquarters are of these industries, where the specialized equipment is produced and sold, where most of the workers originate from who have the specialized training and who travel with the industry. Most of that money will go back to Texas or Oklahoma or other places that have that infrastructure in place. Will there be some people hired from here? Of course there will. Of course we'll have truck drivers, welders. No question. But it'll come, and at some point it'll go. And we don't actually know exactly what it's going to go. What we do know is that the projections the industry made are wildly optimistic based on what's going on in Pennsylvania right now in terms of how long, what percentages of the wells they drill are profitable. Decline curves are much steeper. The numbers of not so good wells are much larger than we were led to believe. That's part of the whole shell game business that the speaker on the 19th will speak to. So I guess the last thing I'd mention is that leaders in this community are often known to talk about the young professionals. They want to retain and attract the young professionals from Binghamton University or maybe the ones that grew up here. And I guess the simple question in my mind is why would they stay and why would they come if it ends up being Susquehanna County north of the border? Amen. And, you know, I have made my choice. I have a house. It's on Powder House Road, which is a county road. It's not at the Vestal Center end, which is more ground zero, but it is close. That's a school bus route. There is no law in this county or in the town of Vestal that will prevent that road from being a major artery if it needs to be. 26 already is an artery and will become a very major artery. Very major. So that's another thing to mention. So finally, to not go on too long, time was when every town official was led to believe in this state that you could do two things in response to this industry. You could pass a road law or a road agreement to try and make sure that your infrastructure would be protected financially, fiscally, your taxpayers, and you could levy taxes of some sort or another. And that's it, because ECL, Environmental Conservation Law 23, said that municipalities were prohibited from regulating this industry, mining industry. Well, that's what was thought to be the case for a couple of years. And then a couple of other attorneys came around saying, well, just hold on a minute. If you look at other areas of mining law, it may in fact be that you can't regulate. Once the industry is there, once it's permitted, no, you can't tell them where and when and what, except for the roads. But in fact, you can use your zoning authority, your police powers, just like anything else, to say, well, you can't come at all. And this has been supported most recently that I've seen by the New York State Bar Association comments to the DEC GEIS process, where they say just that. The lawyer for the Association of Towns has said, this is probably on solid ground. The courts will decide, as many of you know. Dryden, Middlefield, right? It's in litigation. We'll probably hear the first round sometime soon. But I have little doubt that whoever wins, it will be appealed, and that the appellate court, the senior high court in New York, will make the final decision. What is fairly certain to most of us who've looked into this is that if, in fact, New York State and the DEC go forward and permit this process, then towns will be in more shaky ground in terms of the takings argument to begin with. Because until you actually have a permitted process, whether it's takings or not is uncertain. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But after you have a permitted process, yeah. So counseling, delay, and waiting and seeing is precisely not what a town would want to listen to if they wanted to keep their options open. As a town that had a moratorium for a couple of years or a ban could at least wait and see what the EPA had to say about this, and a whole bunch of other people. So, a bunch of towns, dozens of towns, some cities around this region in Pennsylvania have passed bans. We didn't fully realize what this argument meant here. By here, I mean in the town of Vestal. We're not actually in the town of Vestal until the spring of last year. And I have to say that from the beginning of this whole process, I really felt like there was too much attention focused in Albany and not attention focused right where we all live. This is a complicated and contentious business. And if the goal is to get Albany to do this or do that, lots of folks from all kinds of walks of life may just choose to walk away because it's not often an easy matter to get Albany to take action, your kind of action or other kinds of action. But on the other hand, if it's about the people on your board whom you probably know, their kids may go to your school, you may be their neighbors, that's a horse of a different color. That's a way to actually get people educated and organized around anything. So it was a bit late in the game, but we decided, yeah, we're gonna go forward and we're gonna give this the old college try. Our feeling is that there's been so much grass grown at this point, so many things that have been read and heard about independently of any spin by any group, by many people, that most people at bottom would at least like a breather, a timeout, to go on longer in the town. And I think that may be truer than you think wherever it is that you live. I went into the process in Vestal thinking, this board? Here? You're out of your mind. But I've never heard of an elected official that, if they're interested in remaining in politics, doesn't want to be elected again. And that's pretty bottom line. It doesn't matter what party you're from or anything else. If you really think that as a result of taking one position or another at election time, that's going to determine your political destiny, that speaks very loudly. And that's just sort of the bottom line. Then there's the other thing that whatever the personal dynamics or politics of the situation, even if you hate the guts of the person who's at the table, they actually are human too, and they will respond to things. They may have kids. They may care about their property. They may care about something you know nothing about. One example. Turns out, one of our town board members is a bus driver of a school bus who already grouses about having to wait behind the construction vehicles that there are out there. Well, I didn't know about that. And if I had just sort of assumed that this woman was, well, not somebody I could really reach, then I would have been making a big mistake. So I'm going to stop there and see what questions you have. I'll repeat one thing that I said, which is that once the process of unconventional horizontal hydrofracking through long laterals, which is the long name for it, once that's a permitted process by the state, then legally speaking, if you haven't done anything, the ability for you to say no becomes much less likely. Okay, so I think moratorium versus ban. Well, it depends on, if the idea is we understand now that this is bad, and it will always be bad, then why do we want it at all? We'll ban it. If enough of us think, well, you know, there's some uncertainty here, and that's part of the problem. I'm not convinced necessarily this is bad, but there's so much uncertainty and so much already bad things that have been happening elsewhere. At least let's stop the clock. Let's say no for 2 years. I could speculate and say that if this is something that is part of the police powers, if the industry chose to move quietly and swiftly to lease up land without being clear of the legalities, it's not the town's responsibility that they're out of pocket. They could try to sue the state for the same thing, but this is not a legal opinion. And obviously, were I sitting on a board, I'd want the legal opinion. Fortunately, there are those who have the legal opinion. And since the Bar Association, lawyers for the Association of Towns, and at least two other fairly conservative firms thought that this was on fairly solid ground, that speaks somewhat loudly, but the question is somewhat further afield. You know, okay, so fine, so the ban stands up, it's legal. What about the money that's been invested? Well, part of the risks of going in business when you're not clear on things necessarily, or when you're trying to go under the radar to get the best possible price, is just that, risk of doing business. That's how I, as a non-attorney, would respond.
My question addresses the green renaissance and the potential for green jobs. It's a no-brainer to most common citizens that retrofitting is appropriate and we should improve our recreational opportunities. My question addresses the emotional issue that many of us have empathizing with the farmer who is near the poverty level, has been multi-generational on a plot of land, and sees a way of maintaining their legacy on the land. Is Green Renaissance and the green program that you're associated with have a particular targeted program to help the farmers maintain their legacy on their land?
If you're asking if the program I personally am working with right now does, no, it's energy efficiency focused. Do I agree? Absolutely, that we desperately need to be able to grow food in our own region. Let me put it that way. I think people who understand the future that we're facing, the future of scarcer and more expensive petroleum, understand that you want to be able to grow food closer to home. I personally love going to the farmer's market. I was there yesterday. It's small. The number of farmers who are able to grow for even local restaurants, never mind the supermarkets, that sort of capacity, never mind a school district. It's not there yet. It needs to be there. So on the one hand, can I stand here and say I have the plan? No, I don't have the plan. And part of the reason is if it's just, a few of us usual suspects with the plan, it's not enough. So what I'm really arguing here is we need a movement, political movement, so that the governor, I don't even care what governor it is, the governor, the legislature, understand that part of our future in this region is food, growing it safely, growing it profitably, and then processing it safely, and all the way down until you eat it, right? And we want to try and recapture as much of the wealth of that process for the people here. That is huge. I mean, for me, energy, food, they're together. Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment. I moved back to the area in 2008. I agree with you, it's a beautiful area. But I used to live in the Albany area, and I ran a not-for-profit in the Albany area in Ernsberger County. And we received grants. We got grants to do mentoring for farmers, to teach farmers how to niche farm, look at different kinds of produce and other ways to make their farms more profitable. We entered into a relationship with the Brotherhood of the Catholic Church that donated land for the farmers to be trained, and would-be farmers who, part of the issue was repopulating rural areas that had lost population so that small businesses could come back to those small towns, and those towns could be regenerated. And more recently, I believe, in Schoharie County, a couple of farms, major farms, got together and they entered into a relationship with different neighborhoods in New York City where they're providing food products to blocks within the city of New York, and have created a sustainable, profitable way to do business. So there are ways to go about it. It just needs to, as you said, some kind of a movement, but it really needs to have some careful thought with regards to how to go about it. It can be done, and it has been done.
It's being done. I don't want to leave, I don't think most of the people in this room are unaware of the fact that the farmers market movement nationwide and in this state has grown exponentially, that you have more and more people who are already supplying restaurants. It's just that the level, we're here. We need to be here. And in order to go from here to here, I mean, where is agriculture politically in Albany in terms of what people are talking about? It's not exactly at the top of the list. And that is simply never going to happen if it's just the people who are in agriculture talking about it. That's the thing. The numbers aren't big enough. You know, the fact of the matter is this is obvious to everybody, that the age of the farmer has increased, the numbers have decreased. So politically speaking, unless those of us that eat who aren't farmers do something, we're not going to resolve this. So yeah, there are mousetraps out there. They're working. We need to have the capacity to really capture more of the market for those things that work. Like, the idea was to have maybe a gathering with some veteran farmer restaurant teams to come in and say, well, these are the different ways that we've done it, and have people who are toying with it understand what it would mean for their either farm or restaurant to do that, and that it's a different animal than working with Cisco, because the beef you got last month may not taste exactly the same as the beef that you get the next month, but that's actually a good thing. Sort of bouncing off the sermon from earlier, the celebration of diversity. Who would like to eat the same meal every day, three times a day? No, people like diversity in food. So this is actually not a weakness, but a strength. But when you're talking about providing consistency in supply, sometimes you have to sort of point that out. Other questions, Beth?
I was approached just recently by a young woman who's working with Food and Water Watch about the farm bill that's coming up for review. It comes up every 5 years.
Right.
And I think I heard something about GRSC having a program about the...
All right, well, I'm going to have to claim ignorance. I didn't think that we actually had something on the farm bill from Brisk. But what I can say is that from what I've read about the farm bill, we escaped danger last year when a farm bill that would have been very detrimental to small farms didn't go through quickly. But we're far from being out of the woods. I mean, the reality is, I talked about, two different models of the future for the region. Well, there's been two different models for the future of agriculture for a long time. The mega agribusiness model, which requires massive influxes of petroleum resources for both the equipment and the whole logistics process, as well as the fertilizer, which is made from natural gas, among other things, and the pesticides, and then locally, regionally sourced, small and medium scale enterprises, which is a more appropriate scale for agriculture and for the ecosystem, period. In terms of the question, I don't know who in this area is working towards pushing the farm bill other than for crying out loud. No, much older and larger organization for farmers. Thank you, the Farm Bureau. And actually, a little piece of history. Did any of you know that both Cooperative Extension and the Farm Bureau began on Upper Front Street in the second decade of the last century in a very small room? I learned that from the director of Cooperative Extension, who's a bit of a historian of that sort of thing. They were one organization once, and then through various things, they became two organizations. So, I think that's emblematic. I ought to know, and if I don't know, that's a problem. And it may be not just my problem. It may be also the Farm Bureau's problem. We need to find ways to bring together and to be serious, though, because if the Farm Bureau, just to give an example, is going to be asked to spend some of the resources that they have to talking to non-farmers a little more, then it would be nice if something came of that. So I'm certainly personally, I work in the field in a sense, so it's easy for me to say, but I really would love to have something to get behind in this state, a farm bill in this state, that would really, really get where we need to go. Not necessarily everything we want. That's sort of pie in the sky for Albany. I mean, the solar bill is exactly that. It's not trying to get 25% in 20 years, though we probably need to get that. It's trying to get 4%, because that might actually get us eventually to 25% in 20 years when we actually have an industry with the capacity to do that. Similarly to the Farm Bill. To give an analogous example, I would love to see my daughter's school district, the Vestal district, buy lots of stuff from local farmers. Do they have the capacity to produce it? No, they don't. All right, well, something has to be done to get from there to there. And we don't have the resources just in the southern tier. But did you have a follow-up? And then I'll come over here.
I was thinking that partnering with Food and Water Watch organization might be a way for people locally to...
I've heard of them only recently through the work they've done on the issue in hand. I actually am about to call one of their people that just went up to Albany, who was down here, to find out a little more about their organization. And I don't know to what degree they work in this area. I think they're a policy group. Whatever the mechanism, they're certainly in the mix. But I also feel that we need to have more of a mix right here locally and in all the other regions. You know, I guess combine the good stuff that is the farmers market or the existing collaborations between people who sell and grow food and maybe a little more advocacy or a lot more advocacy. I don't know who was first. What do you have there?
I've got their petition, when that woman from
Food and Water Watch?
Food and Water Watch, they have someone in Albany now, and you could look that over, anybody who's interested, and sign it
Okay.
and send it back to them.
I'll
What
pass
I
these
wondered
around.
about, okay, you're talking Farm Bureau, you're talking Cornell Cooperative Extension, both of whom have been entranced by the gas industry. So I'm wondering, now the Organic Farmers Association is certainly clear that you can't grow good food and have gas wells and such all around. It doesn't mix. But how do we overcome that problem?
I actually have good news for you.
Farms, for instance.
Oh, well, there could be. And certainly leasing of wind farms is, for some, a solution to be able to get revenue from their land at less cost. I was reading the newsletter of the Farm Bureau a while back because somebody sent it to me. And there was a letter from a veteran member who was pointing out the results of a survey of Farm Bureau members. And the basic outcome of this was that there is no majority in favor of gas production among Farm Bureau members, and that when some leaders of the Farm Bureau speak as if there were, that's actually not the case. I'm not saying the majority of Farm Bureau members, I am not saying, are against gas production. I'm saying a good number are against. There's a reasonably sized number that are for, and there's some that are dubious and cautious. And maybe some of the others are dubious and cautious too, and maybe the survey instrument wasn't complex enough to reflect that. And I can tell you also from my discussions with individuals and people within the Cooperative Extension network that it's more complicated out there than we might think at first. Would I have liked for both of these institutions to had taken a different posture back in 2008 or even earlier? Sure, of course I would. But I think in this current moment, there is opportunity and openness to have a conversation of a different kind. I think it would change things radically if, well, let's just stick with farmers, thought that there was, in fact, a decent chance, not in their lifetimes, but maybe in the next 5 years, of something really happening with agriculture that would serve small farmers, medium farmers here. That would change the conversation. Because right now, that's, there are things happening, but they're happening for some and not for others, and they're happening kind of incrementally. If we were able to bump it up quick, that would help. Yes?
Adam, are you aware of any organizing that's being done for the town of Union? That's a large...
Short answer is no. Short answer is no, but if you had asked me the same question a year ago about Vestal, the short answer would have also been no. So here's the thing. Who knows when and if permitting will take place? Read the tea leaves. Some would say the conservative play is it could conceivably take place in the spring. 40,000 plus comments and a number of other things say different. So some have said, well, not this year. And maybe that's true. I don't know. I guess no time like the present to start. If that's what you want, my feeling is even if you really want to get to Albany, the way to Albany is in your case, if you're in the town of Union, it's through the town of Union. Because personally, if I'm an elected official in Albany and I already have a position on an issue, and I don't see that my constituency is decisively on the other side of my position, I'm not really sure why I'd change my mind. And so having that all politics is local thing right there, and the polls that have been taken If a retired sociologist is in the room, I'm a sort of former sociologist by profession. Look, if you are given a poll, even if it's the most sophisticated poll in the world, it's based on your understanding of what you're being asked about at that moment. If your understanding happens to be at variance with the facts, and then after the poll, you change your mind because you've learned, it's a snapshot in time, and that's being generous. Because as we know, many polls are either push polls, they're being done because the person polling wants you to say something, and they'll arrange it. And if they don't arrange it, they'll just report it that way. Or the poll is done in such a way that really doesn't capture the nuance of your real position in the real world, were you to make it a priority in your life.
Adam, two things. Home rule. Could
Yeah.
you just talk about that a little bit?
What it is, you mean? Or
What it is, so
Okay.
everybody knows. And then the second thing is, what are the processes? I live in Windsor. What are the processes that need to take place, like you're doing in Vestal,
Okay.
in order to do something similar in Windsor for me that you're doing in Vestal? What are the steps
Okay.
that you're taking if you can address that?
The simple, non-legal definition of home rule is that municipalities in this state and some others have really extraordinary powers to decide what can and can't happen in particular places in their towns. So, for instance, you have zoning. You have rural residential where you don't have sewer water lines. You have residential. You have commercial. You have industrial. You have mixed use. And if I wanted to throw up a farm stand, you'd have more regulatory say over me than you would over the gas industry, because you're not allowed to regulate. There's an agreement there. What it's being contended home rule does say is that you can say no. This industry is not in keeping with the character of the town. It's too dangerous. We don't want it here. Thank you. So home rule, though, at one time, and I'm going to forget the year, I think it was before the 80s, certainly, towns did have home rule on this issue. That was changed through Environmental Conservation Law 23, which said can't regulate. Regulate. So the bone of contention here is regulate mean the operations of the industry day to day? Or does it mean you can't ban either? So that's sort of the very simplistic definition. The second thing I'll say is, if you're interested in doing something like this in Windsor, in addition to having a group of people willing to pursue it, there's already free legal advice from, what is the formal name of their organization? Somebody remember better than I? Anyway.
ELD. Yeah. The what?
Well, there's two, actually. There's CELDEF, and then there's the Slotch's outfit in Ithaca, which are two different things. And I could hook anybody up who wants to. They're very well known. They work pro bono. They have crafted law for many of the municipalities, including the ones in court, that they feel will stand in court and win in court. The Center for Legal Defense, I'm forgetting what it stands for. They were responsible for many other bans, among the most notable Buffalo and Pittsburgh. Their approach is quite different. Their basic premise is corporations have taken on an extraordinarily destructive role in our society, and we need to take our democracy back from them. And so what you ought to do is simply pass the damn ban, and to hell with consequences legally to a point. I mean, they try to make it as good as they can, but it's not really the point. The point is to get that conversation in the face. And then, all right, so you're a citizen of Pittsburgh. You just made a decision in a democracy. And so then the next step in the strategy is it gets challenged in court. And so you're basically confronted with the wealth and power of this corporation that's decided it knows better about what goes on in Pittsburgh than people of Pittsburgh do. Now, not everybody is in the position of Pittsburgh. I don't think Windsor is, and I don't think Vestal is. Although there's some smaller towns in Pennsylvania that have gone that way also.
Yeah, this is the case in Dryden. This is what's happening in Dryden, right?
I don't believe so. I think the Dryden one was one of the Slotcha. Yeah. No, it's home rule. It's not an issue of home rule. It's whether or not the legal language of the ban is structured to be defensible in court as opposed to be to a political challenge. That's my understanding anyway. So what I would also say is that, I mean, I don't know Windsor obviously as well as you do. I know from the maps that it's heavily leased. I know that they must be doing something right at the high school there, because I've seen amazing students come out of Windsor and amazing stuff featured by students at public things in Windsor. I've seen you got a nice town square with some new things happening, relatively speaking. Beautiful countryside. There's a piece of land out there that's actually sacred to some of us out in Quagga. And so I'd hate to see Windsor get all mucked up. I also know you're ground zero in the pipeline world and in the compressor world. If you were able to do something in Windsor, it would be revolutionary. And so, I feel in Vestal we have a challenge on our hands, but you know what? Bigger challenges have been met historically. Since you haven't spoken.
It's 1:48, maybe one more question, Adam?
Thank you.
I have one more comment, if you want.
Please.
You've talked a lot about going and petitioning and asking our elected officials to take certain steps. You haven't talked anything about replacing our elected officials.
Thank you.
The issue from my perspective, I used to work in the legislature, state legislature.
Yeah.
From my perspective, and I met with some of the folks from NIRAD recently with regards to bringing the coalitions together and start forming political action committees.
Yes.
And starting to survey the different town elected and county elected officials to find out where they stand on various issues and start recruiting candidates to run against those who are taking a position that would harm our environment.
You basically said everything I would say in response to the question. The one concern we have, of course, is that elections occur at certain regular periods. However things go, this is absolutely the case. But the challenge, of course, is finding good candidates and getting them elected, and then once they're elected, making sure they stay honest.
Well, the first step of the process, though, is in terms of gaining visibility, is to put candidates forward, create the public pressure. People in Albany, our beloved senator, get to see what the grassroots is really all about, and we can then make those changes. As you said, you don't know what the calendar is going to be like.
You want to run? That's what's going to happen, but people ask me.
The possibility is that it won't take place until the election is completed in November.
That could be.
And if that's the case, and even if it wasn't the case, the pressure of an electoral process in play is going to give the governor cause to slow down.
Absolutely, and really even bigger to me than the challenge of developing the organization and the backing is to actually get good candidates to step forward and run.
And Como's attention.
Well, I think that once you have the movement and the candidates and the process, Cuomo's attention will be the byproduct. It's really, there's good concrete reasons for all of us why we can't run, but I think it is incumbent upon those who maybe have the space and time in their lives. I have 2 small children and debts. And it comes down to what sacrifices are you prepared to make at what time. But what you're saying is absolutely true. And beyond that, the other thing that needs to happen is that this anti-fracking movement needs to turn into a pro-green renaissance movement. Call it what you will. But it needs to not just be about what we don't want. We're pretty clear on that. It's about what we do want and working toward it. All right, one last comment from Eileen Hamlin, who's in a position to know a few things.
Yes. If you are looking for candidates, make sure that they are all around progressives. And then you can bring them to the Working Families Party. And I chair the Working Families Party in this area. It goes, my territory, as it's currently structured, goes from Elmira to Oneonta and north to Cortland and Ithaca. So that's where you can look and come up with good progressives, all around progressives. Citizen Action, which I also work with here, has had some bad experience with environmentalists being so myopically focused that they do screwy things when you get them in office. So that's why, and I'm glad to hear you say, hold them accountable once they're there.
Well, our time is out. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.